If you're looking to level up your UX, content, or product design practice to confidently and joyfully tackle complexity, ask the million-dollar questions, and design digital systems that actually work, you are so in the right place. Welcome to the UX Level Up podcast. I'm Sophia, and for over a decade, I've been teaching professionals how to make the most valuable and often invisible parts of UX gloriously visible. We will untangle the structure beneath the surface before jumping into screens, saving time, money, and headaches, and having so much fun doing it. Together, let's UX collaboration, break down silos, and build shared understanding that sets everyone up for success. Let's become the systems thinkers that our teams, and quite honestly, the world, are so desperately craving. Let's level up our practice and redefine what it means to be a UX designer. Let's jump into it. What's up, UXers? Welcome back to the UX Level Up. Sophia here for another solo episode. I know there's been a lot of solo episodes recently. It's just because I've been a little too lazy to schedule interviews, but I have some coming up. So that is changing soon. I've got more conversations coming up. So it's coming. We'll get there. Today, what I want to do is I want to talk to you about a couple things. I want to talk to you about object prioritization, but I want to talk to you about why I want to talk to you about object prioritization, which is kind of going back into some inner work that I've been doing actually. So I realized a few years ago that I had a chronic feeling of feeling behind, like I'm not doing enough. Like every day I'd get to the end of the day and be like, I didn't get all my shit done, right? Like I didn't check all the boxes, and then I would feel bad about it. And this is the beginning of, I would say, my inner work journey that started in early 2023 in earnest, where I just realized that is no way to live. I don't want to look back on my life and be like, wow, I lived a really cool life, but every single day I didn't feel satisfied and I didn't feel like I was doing enough. So I've been doing a lot of looking into that, right? And where is this belief coming from that I'm not doing enough or that I'm getting behind? That was this feeling of somehow I wasn't keeping up with time or something. And a lot of that had to do with some inner child healing that I needed to do and some reframing of a lot of beliefs and, all the things. Tying love to achievement, all that good stuff. And I've been working so much on that and have seen just amazing differences in how I'm operating and my level of peace, my level of happiness, my joy with the work that I do get done, and my appreciation for my own ambitions. And yeah, so cool, right? But then what I realized just like a couple weeks ago, I was like, in some ways, I actually am getting behind. And that is because I am a creative and ambitious person who is now in their 40s. And I've just had a couple decades of professional life now, a full decade plus of my own business. And I start a lot of projects. And then I finish a lot of projects. But I also don't finish a lot of projects. And I realized just over the years, I have accumulated a lot of unfinished projects, right? So there's on one side of the coin, the fact that I didn't get all 16 things on a list of things that I need to do today done and then feeling bad about it and beating myself up. Like we're not doing that. But then I was able, I guess actually from some of the healing that I did, I was able to look at it objectively and be like, maybe I would feel better if I closed some of these projects out that have just been dragging on and on and on, and I've just been putting them on the back burner or kind of juggling them around and moving them around, or just decide to not do them. Some things needed to either be scheduled, like when am I going to do this? So it stops running a background program in my mind, or just, you know what? I'm not that excited about it anymore. And it's totally okay if I got 70% done with this thing, but if I'm not letting anybody down and the current version of me doesn't really care anymore, other than like some version that just is the OCD version that just wants to check the box and complete it for the sake of completion. Now I'm able to parse that out a little bit more. So I made a list of these projects that have been moved from the back burner to the front burner, the back burner, and the back to the back burner for years, and kind of started looking at them and to be like, which ones do I actually want to finish? So I'm just going to read some of these off for you because just to honestly make you feel better if you have a lot of projects, especially creative projects or side projects that are getting long in the tooth, as they say. So this is just to make you feel better because I've got a ton of them as well. So the one that is the oldest that I put on this list is Cross-Linked. That is my card game. I'm probably going to rebrand it to there's an app for that. I mean, this project is from 7 years ago. So I started working on it in 2016. I launched it for the first time in 2018. I had it on the market for like a year, and then we changed our fonts and colors. So I was like, oh, I'll take it off the market. We'll update it with our new fonts and colors to update it to our brand. And we did that. And then I was like, I really want to update the instructions because the instructions are really bad. And nobody understands the instructions. Instructions are the hardest thing ever to write. It's way easier to design a game than to design the instructions for the game. So then I would kind of like hit this blocker and just haven't picked it up. So that is a 7-year-old project. The book that I've been working on that we did, oh my gosh, we're so close to it. We did get it out, version 1 out to our folks in Foundations Live, the 2025 spring cohort of Foundations Live. All of them, it's in their hands. They're reading it now. They're going to give me feedback. I'm looking for feedback, y'all, if you're reading it. But that project started 5 years ago and I still don't actually have it out. Like it's not for sale yet. We're still working on finishing touches on that. There's a piece of art that I've been working on for 3 years. Oh my gosh, the list goes on. There's like, I'm not going to bore you with the whole list, but it is, what do I have? I think I have 17 or 18 things on this list of projects that I still want to do that are like longer than 6 months old. And most of them are like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years old. And one of them on that list was the ORCA series in this podcast. So this is a series where I was going to go through every step, and I still am. I'm still going to do it. Every step of the ORCA process and give some thoughts, give a quick tip, give a little bit of extra insight, talk about it a little bit more. I wanted this to be supplementary, so it's not necessarily stuff that is in any of my training. So this is kind of meant to be supplementary to the training, but also, of course, draw you into the official training. So I was going to do one episode on each of the steps of the ORCA process, all 16 steps of the ORCA process, and then it would kind of sit together as this sort of series. And I could make a little page with you could get like a little taste of the ORCA process. My first episode came out in February of 2023. And right now it is July of 2025. So that is over 2 years. And I think my last episode of it was sometime last fall of 2024. I kind of just forgot about it. I didn't really forget about it. Actually, I take that back. I didn't forget about it. It's been running a background program in my head. It's been taking up mental space and making me feel this feeling of, oh, I feel behind. I feel like this unfinishedness. So we're picking back up the ORCA series. We're going to get it done. And like, hold me to it, y'all. Hold me to it. And actually, so we were officially halfway done. We got the first 8 done. And actually, this is really good timing because I'm picking us up at Object Prioritization. And I'll go ahead and announce it. I don't think this is any secret. So we are refilming the OUX Masterclass. Like pretty much the whole thing is getting refilmed. I say that now. Like there might be pieces of it that we're like, we don't really need to refilm this, but the majority of it is getting refilmed for cohort 11, OUX.com/certification. If you want to get on the wait list for cohort 11, we are starting on September 8th, but go ahead and get on the wait list. Mark your calendars. We are refilming the whole thing and we'll be dripping out all the new content. And yes, if you are already in the self-paced masterclass, you will get all the updates. And I am not the only person doing the filming. I am bringing on 2 more stars of the show. Allie O. Fisher is going to be owning the representation round, and Jake Zukovsky is going to be owning the prioritization round, which is so freaking cool. So I will be in those rounds as well, popping in and out, but they actually have more expertise than I do in these areas now. So it makes total sense for me to bring in some star OUXers to also just make it way more interesting to watch. There'll be more personalities and oh my goodness, are they amazing personalities or what? So I'll probably I haven't even told Jake and Allie, I'm just recording this on a Saturday afternoon because I had a hair too. So Jake, Allie, you probably will have gotten a voice note from me, but I will be wanting to bring you in for some podcast episodes to talk about these steps of the ORCA process. Okay, I am officially rambling now, so let's get into it. Let's get into object prioritization. So I'll talk about this one, and then I'll see if Jake wants to come in and talk a little bit more about some of the other steps in the prioritization round. And definitely stay till the end because I have a couple more thoughts and some advice for you, some tips if you do feel like you have a lot of projects that are just hanging out unfinished. I have some more thoughts, but I do want to go ahead and get into the meat of the episode. So, first of all, changes to the prioritization round overall. We have a little bit of a new rhythm for the prioritization round that Jake Zukovsky is going to be really turning the volume up on. So this new rhythm basically is this idea that for every pillar of the ORCA process, our objects, our relationships, our calls to action, our attributes, we can think of prioritization from two lenses. First, from phasing from a business perspective. Like, what are we doing first, second, third, fourth, right? And then ranking what's left from a user perspective. Okay, so we want to phase it out first from business and also like from an engineering perspective too, like what makes sense as far as order of operations to actually design and build. And then what we can do is we can say, okay, now we know what's phase one, so to speak. And then we can rank, those are R's, our C's, and our A's from a user perspective based on what they want to see first, what is most important, what needs to be at the top of the page, what needs to be the most prominent, right? So what I was doing is I was kind of doing that just for our calls to action, just for the C of the ORCA process. And then when I started writing the book and I really was like structuring the book and I saw kind of like the outline in the sidebar and I was like, why am I not organizing every step of the prioritization round by phasing and then by ranking? Okay, so it's phasing from the business perspective and then ranking what's left from the user perspective. And we can do that for our O's, our R's, our C's, and our A's. Okay, so that's the structure of the book. That is the new way we want to sort of, new beautiful symmetry we want to introduce into the masterclass and that we will be introducing with Jake helping. Okay, so what I really want to dig into today with object prioritization is that phasing road mapping, okay? And I want to tell you a story of how I discovered this, if you will, how I just discovered kind of prioritization from a OUX perspective for the first time. And this was back in 2017. And I was working with a software company who designed software for large apartment complexes, basically to manage large apartment complexes. And they had a system that worked, but it was just a massive mess from a technology and a UX perspective. So they were at a point, I think that their software was about a year or two old. They were kind of in that startup phase. They were like, okay, now is the time to build this from the ground up and do it the right way. So they had an existing system, but they wanted to add stuff. They wanted to like grow and replatform, and they brought me on to OUX it. And it was such a fun project. I was working directly with about 5 or 6 other engineers and me. And they loved the ORCA process. It wasn't called the ORCA process then, but they loved the object mapping. They loved the OUXing. They loved all the color coding. I still remember that was the first time a developer said sort of tongue in cheek that I was taking the fun part away from what they do as developers. But then he came back and was like, no. You know, I mean, like, it's so much fun and so much better. But he made sure to clarify that he meant that it was really amazing that we were both working on it together and that we were doing this before we were doing screen design. So I thought of it as a beautiful compliment, and he said it with a smile. So anyway, I'm working with this great team of engineers, and we build this massive object map. So we were working in a WeWork, and we had this like really cool conference room booked out, and we had this object map just like, you know, it was there. We spent like 6 or 7 weeks on it or something. So significant amount of time moving sticky notes around. I digitized it in like Sketch or something like that was the tool that I was using at the time. And it was about, I would say like 25 objects or so. And we went to go present it to the investors, and we kind of showed them like how the object, like kind of how to read an object map, and we were walking them through it, and so they could kind of get this beautiful X-ray vision of what we were thinking. And I had some other diagrams too, but no screens. And they were nodding their heads, and they're like, "This sounds great. How long do you think this is going to take to build?" And the lead engineer was like, "Oh, about 18 months." And all the investors were like, what? Well, we need something out in the next 4 months. Like this just hadn't been communicated or something, or I didn't know. We didn't know. I'm like, oh, you want something live in 4 months? Good to know. So at first my heart sank. I was like, oh my gosh, like we need to start completely from scratch. What are we going to do? Like this is just, we just created something way too big. We bit off way more than we could chew. And like untangling this is going to be so, so difficult. And then we got together and we were like, well, actually, we could just remove some of these columns of this object map. We could just take some of these objects out. And when we take the object out, we're taking all the relationships out underneath it. We're taking all the calls to action out. We're taking all of the attributes out. So we can kind of just decide which objects are most important and which objects still create a really valuable system. And then the other objects can go into the phase 2 or a phase 3. We can sort of phase out these objects. And then we have this beautiful trickle down effect, right? Because once we phase the objects, then we kind of have an idea of the phase of the relationships, the CTAs and the attributes within the objects. And it took like an afternoon. And actually we didn't really have to change anything. It was just, let's just cinch down this map that we created. And in fact, so it wasn't a complete redo. And in fact, what was really cool about this was this going wide that we did, this broad, wide kind of like 18-month to 2-year plan that we had of like where they wanted to get was actually not wasted time at all. It actually gave all the pieces we needed to prioritize strategically, right? So we had all the pieces on the table and we could say, okay, what's more important, what's not important. And then it also helped myself as a designer and the engineers know what was coming around the corner. So then when I started designing, I only was designing, I hadn't done any screens yet, and I was only designing based on the objects that we had prioritized, but I also knew what was coming. So I was designing in a very, very different way. I was trying not to paint ourselves into a corner because I knew that, oh, all these capital expenditure objects were coming. You know, we had like the whole capital expenditure object set got deprioritized. It was like 7 or 8 objects. But when I was designing now, it was like we were starting off with just like checklist management. But I knew this other stuff was coming, so I could really strategically design my screens, and the developers could do the same thing to the best of their ability. We had been marinating in what we wanted to build over the course of 2 years. So when it came to what are we going to do in the next 4 months, we could do it really, really strategically and really reduce the amount of design debt and tech debt. So it was really cool, you know, and we were able to create that 2-year plan in like 6 or 7 weeks, which in the long term is not, it was not like we spent years on this. We're not talking waterfall, y'all. We're not talking waterfall. We're talking like a month and a half or something of strategic information architecture thinking and systems thinking to figure out where we want to be. Then we can take it back, say, what is the cinched down version of this? What is the juicy core of objects? And then when we design those and we actually implement those, we're doing it with this really kind of future casted mind, if that makes sense. And I do acknowledge for sure that like some things were probably going to change, right? Because once you put something out, once we put that MVP out or phase 1 or whatever you want to call it, once we got that out, of course we were going to get feedback, right? We were going to understand more what people actually wanted. We were going to, you know, potentially some of our model of what we had planned for phase 2 and phase 3 would shift around a little bit. But the thing is, it would be small shifts because let's just say this 2-year plan was based on user interviews, figuring out the mental model of the customers and the domain model of the industry. So the objects weren't going to change. We knew what the capital expenditure objects were. Those are the things, right? So maybe there would be small changes in our implementation, in the screen, in the UI, little things like, oh, let's put the button here instead of here. But the overall system, it wasn't like putting out that first thing was going to blow everything else out of the water, because we had done the research and we kind of just knew these are the things and these are how the things are connected and these are generally what people want to do to the things, and this is basically the attribute structure. And again, that detailed prioritization might change, but in general, the overall structure didn't. So I want to come back to this domino effect, right? So when we prioritize our objects, when we say, okay, we're going to move this object to phase 2, All right. That means we're moving its relationship. So its nested objects are also getting moved to phase 2, the nested objects inside of it, and that object as a nested object. Okay, so let me think of an example. Okay, I'm actually looking at the old diagrams now. I paused it and pulled up the old diagrams. So lease. So actually lease and resident were objects that got put into phase 2, or like they were like phase 1.2 or something like that. Like they're going to come, but they're not going to come right when we launch in 4 months, but they're going to be right on the heels. So lease and resident, we're going to get rolled in and during phase 2. So what we knew though is once we were like, okay, this phase 1 is not going to have lease. It's also the way that lease was going to be showing within a living space. So the living space object, basically room/apartment. We just call it living space to be more broad. So we knew that it was going to nest within living space, but we knew now that the living space object was not going to have a lease nested underneath it. Okay. And then when I looked at the lease, there was not going to be anything nested underneath the lease because there was not going to be a lease, right? So there was no nested objects underneath lease. There was not any CTAs on lease, right? You couldn't renew a lease. You couldn't cancel a lease, right? Because there was no lease. There were no attributes. All the attributes on lots of attributes on a lease. Okay. So, date initiated, date the lease ends, the cost of the living space for this particular lease, like all that information, boop, goes away, right? Gray it out for right now. It is not in the system. Okay. It's going to be in the system later. Okay. So once we said no lease, then we don't have that. Once that object is gone, I know I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but this feels like might be a difficult concept. Once the object is gone, all the stuff associated with it, the R's and the C's and the A's now are also phase 2 or later, right? And then I will reiterate again, the only screens I needed to design were for the O's, the R's, the C's, and the A's that were in phase 1, okay? And of course, we started with the objects, saying which objects are in for this 4-month deadline and which objects are we doing, or phase 1.2, phase 1.4, phase 2, phase 3. And then we also had a bucket for needs research. Like, do we even want this object in our system? So we had some of those. We're like, you know what? We're not really confident that we even need to be doing, let me look at one that's, memory lane. Okay. Like asset type was one of them. I think that was sort of like, we need to look into that a little bit more, but yeah. So consider also having a needs research category for objects that once you start prioritizing them, you're like, you know what, we're not even sure about this. And there's all sorts of other things you can do. You can plot it on like a cost benefit matrix. There's all sorts of things that we get into in the OUX masterclass where we really get into how to prioritize in detail. But that's the high level right there. So when you phase your design and development by object, instead of by feature, which is usually a verb or like user story or something like that, there are a couple key advantages. There's 3 main advantages that I identified. I think there's a whole lot more, but on this Saturday afternoon, these are the 3 that I identified. Okay. The first one is kind of not a cop out, but kind of like a giveaway. So the first reason is that it's simply easier to understand. Because people think in objects, okay? Go read my articles on Medium about how people think in objects, all right? There's science behind it. This is how our brain works. It's how the visual cortex works. Object identification. This is how our language works. I promise. So understanding what objects are in and what objects are out is just way easier to conceptualize than what amorphous features or stories or, God forbid, pages are in or out, okay? So we will prioritize our CTAs too, which basically turn into object-oriented user stories. So we do build our user stories, but they're based on the objects, right? So we kind of phase out our objects first, and then, because of that beautiful domino effect or trickle-down effect, then only the CTAs that are left on the objects that are left, then we can rank those user stories, okay? But when we divide it up by object first, then it just makes it a whole lot easier. So in other words, features or stories or pages or even like tickets or requests are things that are about the real things. So they're containers, and they're often these containers that are very verb-based, all right? And you're kind of once removed from the real stuff that users care about. So tickets are absolutely great for bug fixes, but not so much for high-level product design strategy. Our systems are made out of O's and R's and C's and A's. That is the material of a system. You might be calling them different things. You might not be paying attention to those things, but like, I don't care. That's what a system is made of. It is made of ORCA, Object Relationships, Calls to Action, and Attributes. Okay? And you are prioritizing the creation of a system, not a series of screens, not a list of user stories. So if you try this, I guarantee you will see this playing out, how much easier it is to just conceptualize the roadmap when you're doing it by O's, R's, and C's and A's, especially your O's first versus a bunch of features or user stories. So number one, it's just easier to understand. And the stuff we're dealing with is complex enough. Let's not make it harder than what it needs to be. So number two, dependencies are a whole lot less clear when we prioritize by the doing, by the features, the pages, the stories, because a feature or a page could touch several objects and relationships and CTAs and attributes, and we might not even be very aware of it if we're not doing our ORCA due diligence. So what happens is you end up designing user story A that includes, let's say, the floor plan object, okay? And then you go and you design user story B a few weeks ago that also includes the floor plan object, but like in a slightly different context. And then what you realize is you probably could have designed one version, one representation of the floor plan object that's going to work really well in both scenarios, but like your user story A version doesn't quite work in your user story B version. And so now you need to reinvent the wheel a little bit. You need to like make it fit for user story B. So I'm all for designing for context when it's absolutely necessary, but what we don't want is we don't want to create these arbitrary changes from one context to another context because we weren't thinking holistically, right? So what you end up with here is what we call in the OUX world a shapeshifter. Okay, so this was one of the first things that triggered in my mind when I started becoming a systems thinker. And that's when I was at CNN, and I'm so sorry if you've heard this story before, I'm just gonna tell it really quick. But when I was at CNN in 2012, I got tasked with designing the experience for the election results. I was gonna design the new responsive experience for CNN.com. And my manager came to me and I got brought on about 4 days before development was going to start. It was really late in the game and somebody had decided that it was going to be responsive last minute. And they were planning, I think the design team was planning on, or design leadership was planning on just using the 2008 designs. So my job was to just like look at 2008 and rectify it. And I was told, don't worry, I know it's a tight timeline, but for Monday, all we need is the state detail page. So we were definitely like prioritizing and road mapping the development, at least the development sprints by page. So just start with the state detail page. So Georgia, California, Ohio, whatever. And that is when my brain went, and I was like, that's not going to work. That's really dumb because what's going to happen is I'm going to design this one page and it's going to have a bunch of stuff on it. And then I'm going to design another page, but I'm going to want to reuse that stuff. But now it's going to be in a different context. Like I need to think about what the things are here and design those things first, and then they'll fit into the pages. Okay. And this was beautiful. This was the first time I designed something kind of like a system. And this is the beginning. This is the beginning of OUX. And it worked so well that I got asked to speak about it and I got asked to teach about it and yada, 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 yada. The rest is history. Okay. But what I was being asked to do is I was being asked to prioritize by page, which is the worst. Don't let them do it to you. Fight the good fight. If you need to come talk about it, come to forum.aux.com and commiserate. We'll talk about it together. We'll answer your questions. But if you're being asked to design page by page or screen by screen, whatever you want to call it, or part of screen by part of screen, come on in, okay? Come on in. We'll talk about it. It is not the best way to design. Okay, actually, it will set you up for failure. All right, so number 2, dependencies are far less clear when we prioritize by the doing instead of by the objects. Dependencies are very clear when we prioritize by our objects.
Okay, number 3, this is great for users too. Okay, so as users, oh my gosh, some of the most disruptive stuff is when your cheese gets moved as a user, right? Because somebody's updated the system now and they've added some stuff, but then when they added some stuff, they had to move other stuff around, right? So because introducing new O's and R's and C's and A's, it usually requires little to no refactoring of the existing system, especially if you've worked ahead a little, like I did on accident with the apartment management software, right? Because you're just making the existing system more robust and you kind of mapped out like, okay, this guy just slots in and now it needs a relationship to this other thing. So even introducing a new object is not very disruptive. If disruptive at all. Usually it's just like, oh, cool, that thing is there now too. But my underlying architecture is staying really nice and consistent, right? So this is much less disruptive for our users when we grow our system in this way by making a more robust system, by introducing more O's, R's, and C's and A's, okay? But adding features often requires shoving things in around the existing experience, and then the existing experience needs to change. And that often sucks for your end user. So this is just a much more seamless way to create that simple system that works and then make it more robust over time without disrupting your existing users. And there's so many more things that we can get into. I know you're thinking like, well, what if I already have this big existing system and I'm being asked to design by feature and we're just like, tweaking here and tweaking there. Please come in, forum.oux.com. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you're dealing with. It's a big therapy session. All right. We have Q&A once a month and go into the water cooler. Somebody's going to help you out with whatever it is that you're dealing with. Okay. So all 3 of these overlap. Let me just recap them for you. Okay. So number 1, easier to understand. Number 2, dependencies. All right. Much easier to map dependencies. And number 3, it's just better for your users, right? Less disruptive. Okay. So all really, I think, really great reasons to do it this way. But you might, depending on your level of leadership right now, your hands might be tied. Or leaders, if you're listening, let's talk. Let's do it. Try it out. Let me know how it goes. And if you feel like your hands are tied with this, come talk to us in the forum. Okay. So the best metaphor that I have for you, OUXers, let me know if you have something better because this metaphor is not great, but it's working for me right now. Okay. Let's say you're trying to prioritize a bunch of meatballs. All right. This is easy. The meatballs are easy to see. They're distinct. They're easy to separate. You can say this one looks the most tasty to the least tasty, or the most well-formed to the least well-formed, whatever it is. I don't know why you'd be prioritizing your meatballs, but pretty easy to do if you were to need to prioritize meatballs. Versus trying to prioritize a tangled mess of spaghetti noodles. Okay. They're all interwoven. They're hard to see. They're difficult to introduce a new one. You got to kind of weave it in, right? Without disrupting the other noodles. All right. Much easier. Prioritizing by object is like prioritizing your meatballs versus prioritizing all your noodles. Okay. Okay. Did that metaphor work at all? Let me know. Let me know if you have anything better. Okay, so I will be back soon, I promise, to continue wrapping up the ORCA series. I'll see if Jake wants to come on and talk about some of the prioritization steps, and I'll see if I can drag Allie in to talk about representation. And my parting tip for you is if you are feeling like the unfinished projects are just stacking up and you're feeling like they're weighing you down, they're dragging you into the past, they're making you feel behind, list them all out. Get them on a piece of paper and see if you can start with the oldest, start with some of the old ones, kind of like paying off your credit card debt, like start with the old ones that are like easy, get those paid off first. But also I want you to reframe it. So this was really helpful for me. Like I made this list and at first I was like, oh, I'm so bad at finishing things. I'm a terrible person. And then I was like, no, Sophia, you finish a lot of things. You do a lot of things. You're fine. How cool. Thank you, past me, for getting all these really amazing projects started for me and almost finished. Some of these are 80 to 90% finished. All right. So present me right now has all this cool stuff to play with and a lot of it's almost done. How neat is that? So thank past you for getting all this cool stuff going for you. And then what you can do is my 2025 is, as the ADHD community says, I'm popping the stack. Have you heard this before? I just learned this term. I just learned this term from my husband. Yeah. So this is apparently a thing that a lot of people with ADHD do, is they like almost finish a bunch of stuff so that purposely they could end and just like pop the stack and be like done, 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 which I think is awesome. So my 2025 is pretty much popping the stack here. And then also remember that you might be able to drop some of it. All right. So if it's no longer interesting to you and you aren't really letting anyone down, and it's a creative project, even if it's a 90% done creative project, like I will give you permission. You're allowed to let it go. That's completely fine. You learned something, you grew in some way doing it. You also learned what you don't maybe want to be doing as much, or maybe it was just a past version of you that was like super into macrame or something like that. And you started that plant hanger 5 years ago and you haven't finished the plant hanger. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to go buy a $30 macrame plant hanger on Etsy and support somebody who really loves macrame. And this, I am just going to, I don't know if you can recycle yarn. I'm just going to put it in the compost. I'm going to dispose of it responsibly. That's what I'm going to do, and not let it weigh on me anymore. Yeah, that might be a true story about something that I've done recently. Okay, so I give you permission. You can totally drop it. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's a little bit of a mashup of lots of different things that have been on my mind, and I hope it helps you level up in your UX practice and in your life in general. And I'll be back soon to talk to you. All right, happy OAUXing.
Thank you so much for listening to the UX Level Up podcast. If you want to connect with me, Sophia, please follow me on Instagram at SophiaVUX, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Sophia Prater. I'm pretty easy to find there. Our music was brought to you by Ruby Vell, courtesy of Sugaroo Records. Thanks again for listening.